and welcome to ConTinual. My name is Jean Marie Ward, and tonight we're going to be spending an hour with Stuart Jaffe, the author of the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries series and the Nathan K. Thriller series. Welcome, Stuart.
Thank you for having me.
We're so glad you can make it. I got a question. Which came first for you, the writing or the guitar playing?
I was about to say the guitar playing. I've been playing guitar since I was about 15 years old, so quite a long time. Technically, I guess the writing came first because I have a vague memory when I was really little of sitting at my desk on a typewriter. That's how old going back I am, and really sitting down and going, I'm going to write the great American novel, which of course was a science fiction novel. And it took me all day to write like a page, which actually I guess would have been two because it was single spaced. And, it ended up being the beginning of a short story. I have no idea what it was about. I don't remember anything other than it took me forever. And then I realized maybe I won't be writing a novel. And then it took me like decades till I actually got to writing a novel again.
Okay,
so take that for whatever you want.
So basically, you started out wanting to be a blues guitarist, not a writer, or not.
No, yeah, I had when I picked up the guitar, I had dreams of being a rock star, of going that direction. But I fast realized that I taught myself to play, and I just didn't have the dedication. Like if I play well now. I play at a level that I don't feel bad taking money when I get my band plays places. But it's been like 40 years, almost 40 years of playing, and I think just through sheer time I've become good. But had I actually worked at it back then, I'd have gotten to where I am now, like within a few years of before I was even 20, and maybe would have had a shot. But no, I quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. Went to college and actually got a theater degree. That was another thing. I was gonna go like do movies and that kind of thing as a director. Went out to Hollywood and did that for a very short time, and I was expecting it to be kind of a dirty and disgusting business to some extent behind the scenes, but especially at that time, that decade, this is long before Me Too, things were really nasty, and I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. By that point, I'd written my first attempt at a book, and I was like, you know what, the writing thing. I'd been writing plays for years. I just liked that. I was good at it. And I was like, I'll just go this route, and maybe someday something I make will get made into a TV show or a movie, and I can get into the Hollywood angle from there. Because those are the people at the top, the actors, the producers, even and the directors. They're the ones who actually are creating something, in my opinion. From what I've seen, like when I was I was a gaffer and a grip, and basically just hauling stuff around, and I saw people who, like the people making furniture for a set. They were making furniture, and I mean, I'm sure for a lot of them they really felt, and this is not taking anything away from them, I'm sure they felt pride in what they did and feel connected to the movie that they were a part of. But to me, it seemed like they could have been making furniture to sell as furniture. So I didn't see the connection. And so I turned that all down and went and became a writer.
So you're living as a writer, as soon as you left Hollywood, or?
No, it took a long time. No, I went the usual route of, spent the first 10 years doing short stories. Because there was no legitimate self-publishing back then. And so the general route was short stories in sci-fi and fantasy magazines, try to get an agent, and then go that route. And so, I always remember, you get those first couple sales and you're like, ooh, this year I got to take my wife out to a movie. And then, next year you sell enough that maybe you got to pay one like cheap bill, and then eventually you're paying most of the bills, and then you're paying the mortgage, and then you're paying, and eventually you get up there. And I had an agent, went through the whole route, got almost quit right before everything changed. I had the agent, I would write books, they would go to all the publishers would all come back and say, man, we love his writing, we love the story, we love the characters, love, we're not going to buy it. Over and over and over. And I had written the first Max Porter book, Southern Bound, and I remember looking at it going, do I really want to go on this merry-go-round again? And at that time, self-publishing had been viable for about a year. I wish so badly I had not been brainwashed into thinking it was such a dirty word, because I would have jumped in right at the beginning and been able to possibly hit the gold rush like a few other people. But it took me a year to wrap my head around it. And then I tested the waters with a short story collection. And I'll tell you, the moment I had a sale that I could not identify who it was, it wasn't my mom, it wasn't, when I got a sale, I'm like, I don't know who bought that. I suddenly felt like I did when I started a decade earlier, where I was like really excited and not just beaten down. And at that point, I was like, that's it. I got rid of my agent. I'm like, I'm never doing traditional publishing again. And I was that way for about another decade. And it's only been recently where I've been in a position where I, could talk to, in this case, a small press like Falstaff, and basically sit down with the publisher and say, here's how I'm approaching this. If we're going to work together, it's going to be X, Y, and Z. I'm not interested in a traditional deal, and we can negotiate it, because if it didn't work out, fine, I've got my living, and I'm happy. So I'd be happy to sit down with Tor or anybody now, because I could easily walk away if I don't like the deal. So yeah, there's the whole journey.
Yeah, I want to get into the origins of Max Porter in a few minutes, but before we go there, I want to talk about a piece of the puzzle that was happening when I met you way back in 2014. Actually, it was winding down then. Was that you also started a long-running podcast with your wife called The Eclectic Room, and I was wondering, did that play any role in the transition from presumably office slave like the rest of us to making your living from your keyboard?
I'd love to say yes, but I don't think so. So we started that as a way to, at that point, my son was still a toddler and basically consuming our lives. And so we started that as a fun thing, and a thing that we could do together, where we knew at least once a week we could have an adult conversation about something that was not diapers and formula or whatever we were dealing with at the time, or toddler stuff. And so it just started out of that, and I mean, on the back of my mind, I figured it could help me promote myself and promote my books and things like that. And it was a real education. Actually, it was a very useful education in understanding how disruptive technologies worked, because when we started the Eclectic Review, it was still the Wild West in podcasting. So we would be easily, every week we put out a show, we would be in the top 10 of our category on iTunes, which is like unheard of now. You can't, you just can't, as a little indie thing. And at our height, we were getting, I don't know, 15, 20,000 people listening, which was a huge amount for having next to no advertising or anything. But I can remember the day I went to look on the iTunes chart to see where we were that week. And I noticed that also in the top 10 was the Battlestar Galactica podcast. And I was like, oh, what's that? That's new. And it turned out it was actually being done by Ron Moore and the Battlestar Galactica cast. And so it was professionals doing a professional job And I thought to myself, that's not good for me. And then sure enough, shortly after that, NPR started broadcasting, and within weeks we could no longer even crack the top 20 because there was just too much big money production being done there. And so it was the same thing with not. It was a very similar thing I saw when indie publishing started. In that, in the beginning, you could put up anything. You didn't have to know. It didn't have to be edited. It didn't have to be, the covers could be just practically hand drawn because there was so little competition that audiences were just hungry for it and they would take whatever they could get. And so you got some really out there stuff that should never have been made, and you got stuff that was like really avant garde and cool and exciting and great stuff and horrible stuff. And then slowly, more professionals started getting in. And so, whenever I teach to new indie authors, I often say, you don't have to. Nobody's forcing you to spend money on a good cover, but I am spending money on good covers. And while technically we're not really in competition with each other, because of course a reader can buy my book and your book, and it's not a zero-sum game. But at the same time, if you're trying to attract somebody to make them think you're serious, you are competing with my covers and all the other professional jobs out there. So I've seen that kind of change a little bit too. But
So you teach too. Now that I didn't find when I was
I don't have a teaching, like I don't have a regular class or anything, but I just was recently down speaking at the Atlanta self-publishing conference. So I had an hour and a half teaching session there. I've done Saga's conference, and I think I'm doing that next year too. I've I've taught like just one day things at schools, everything from literally doing it at the kindergarten level all the way up to college courses, just different opportunities. People come in and ask me to speak. And of course I do panels and conventions and all that. And whenever I can, I'm happy to share with new writers whatever I can, because of course we all have that. I had other people who especially back when I was coming up, the internet was not nearly what it is today. And especially in the very beginning of my career, the internet, I didn't even like have it in my head to go to the internet for information. That was not, so really it was the world of publishing was a complete mystery. And, we were still, all my short stories were snail mailed. That's how it was done. And so it was, thankfully some writers who I met at conventions and things who kind of helped me learn the ropes. And so I like to do this when I can, do the same for others.
Now you mentioned Saga, you mentioned Atlanta's conferences, and I happen to know that you're in North Carolina, and but you're not native to North Carolina. And I think, as I understand my research, it was your move to North Carolina that gave birth to Max Porter. Could you give us a little bit of background on that, and
Sure.
how he developed? And
Sure. The story of Max Porter. So it started for a couple reasons. One, I had my agent. I was kind of one book after another. I'd written, science fiction and epic fantasy and all this, and nothing was taking. And my wife said to me, you love mysteries. Why don't you write a mystery and just completely change genre and, see what happens? And I thought, well, maybe I'll do that. And at the same time, we had been living, we moved down to North Carolina about, I don't know, 20 years ago now. So I've been here a long time. And at the time, my wife was doing a graduate degree at Wake Forest University.
Mhm.
And so we were living in Winston-Salem, and I was realizing I knew nothing about the area I was living in. And I had plenty of time where she would be teaching at the university as part of, earning her keep while she was, so that they would pay for her to get her degree. And so she would teach, and I'd go meet her for lunch or something, but I'd be there. And so I would go to the library sometimes to work or whatever. And one day I was thinking, well, I bet you there's information here, the library, about this town. Go figure. And so I started looking around, and I found this book, and it was about um, I can't remember it was all about the history of Winston-Salem, and I found this nugget, which technically is a spoiler, but the book's been out for over a decade, so I think we're past that. But I found this nugget where during World War II, R.J. Reynolds Tobacco, which was headquartered in Winston-Salem, the soldiers were smoking. Cigarettes were rather new, and soldiers were just downing them left and right because they, of course, were going to war and they were very nervous, and so the government was having trouble providing enough cigarettes for the troops. So the president of the United States contacted R.J. Reynolds and said to him, "We need more cigarettes." And R.J. Reynolds is like, "Well, I can run my factories 24/7 if I had enough labor." And so we shipped in German POWs to North Carolina. And there were, I forget the number, it's in the book, 20 some, I think, little small camps dotted all around the state. Each one only had 18 or 20 prisoners. And they were quietly kind of there. And then at night, we'd bust them all in to Winston-Salem, make them work, and get them out before anybody woke up. And I knew a lot about World War II, and that was the first time I'd ever heard anything about any POWs, any Germans, particularly on U.S. soil. And so I'm like, well, there's the writer brain is like, there's a story there. And so I started trying to put a story together, and it just so happens that I'm a born sci-fi fantasy lover, and I always have loved this stuff. And while I really enjoy all kinds of books, turns out that whenever I write something magical happens, or something sci-fi, aliens pop up. And in this case, I'm just kind of, I just really was kind of pantsing a story, which I don't do anymore. But back then, I kind of would just sit down and start writing. And I ended up creating Marshall Drummond, who's 1940s detective who died and was cursed by a witch, and that's why he exists in the present day. And Max Porter kind of uncovers him, and they start dealing with it, working together. And so it was born out of that. And so every book in the series deals with real history of usually the Triad, which is a certain section in the middle of North Carolina, but also it spreads out further and further. And I find real bits of history, and I kind of throw in witches and magic and curses and have fun with it. So yeah, it all just kind of happened.
Well, a little bit of wish fulfillment. Who wouldn't want to find a work partner, in their office, especially if he's not too bad of a ghost? But was most of the research done in the library or in the internet, or did you do? I mean, one of the things that inspires me a lot is I get to a new place, I walk the ground, I look for weird historical markers, and I take a lot of tours and ghost tours, just
Right.
Walking tours, because sitting in a bus, no, but
Right.
walking the ground really seems to get the juices flowing. Did you do any of that when you were developing the series?
Sure, it's developed book after book after book. That back then, it was the initial research was done in the library. Over the years, I've collected all kinds of books about strange murders and strange history of the state. So a lot of the initial research I can just do at home or on the internet to find the one or two things that I need to connect and start to build a story out of. And then whenever possible, I will, I'll drive out to the places, and because you will find all kinds of things. The second book in the series, Southern Charm, deals with a place called Kerner's Folly, which is in Kernersville, and it's this strange house. It's basically Mr. Kerner back in the 1800s was selling. He would make all different kinds of things for your home, different doors, different things like that. So he basically turned his house into a showroom. So every door is different in the house. and there are different styles of stairs and all kinds of stuff. But it was also, in addition to that, it was a very strange house anyway. Like, there's a floor that's only a half floor. He built a whole floor for his little kids so that they wouldn't feel like they were in this massive 10-foot steel. So I'm only 5'3" maybe, and yet my head was like rubbing the ceiling of this floor. So there's like the first floor, then there's floor 1.5, and then the second floor, and then there's like in the attic there's an entire theater, one of the first private stage theaters in the country, and they actually would put on productions. And then there's also a very creepy model of the house up there that the kids would play with. So I used all of that. Oh, and then best of all, I'm walking into the place because they gave tours of the whole thing. They still do. As they're walking in, there's this little thing at the side. I think it's called the Witch's Corner. It says like Witch's Corner, where you're supposed to put a little money to protect you before you go on. I mean, I would never have thought of that, but of course it's in the book because it writes itself.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that kind of stuff, and you get the smells of a place. You get all sorts of stuff. You can I'm sure you can tell the books where I was really able to go and spend time at a place versus like during the more unpleasant couple of years where nobody could go anywhere.
Right.
And I still had books I had to put out. And so I couldn't go to the places. So I had to rely on what I could find, on the internet or had done research before everything had shut off. And I have so many great stories of meeting people who are just take me into their homes, and it's wild. So yeah, I do as much hands-on as I can.
It's amazing when you say, "Hi, I'm a writer. I'm doing this."
The
how
writer
people will
card.
go, "Yes, let me tell you my story so that it has some permanence, some immortality."
My favorite story of this, you've probably heard this, but for the audience, it is I think it's for the book Southern Haunts, which I think is the fifth one. I had found out on the internet that back in the 1930s, 40s, somewhere around there was this story about this woman gets arrested for shoplifting a hat. She's very stubborn about it. She won't pay the fine. It ends up going to court. And she says something in court that hints at the fact that she basically runs a brothel. And it's not just any brothel. This turns into a very Heidi Fleiss situation because the mayor, the chief of police, very big, are all known people who go
Customers.
there. And so for about a week, it becomes this very intense, like in the papers every day. There's so many articles written about it. She disappear. She and her sister, I think, were running the place. They disappear. There's a lot of unknowns that go on. Excuse me. And so it was great fodder for the book. So the house, the address is given in the articles. So I look it up on Google, and sure enough, the house is still there. So I drove over to it just to look around in the neighborhood, get an idea of what the area looks like so I could describe it. So I parked outside the house. And at this time, this is only 5 books in, and I'd yet to ever really drop the writer card like that. So I was not about to go knock on their door or anything. I'm just sitting there outside writing notes. And it's broad daylight, in the middle of the day. It didn't even occur to me anything. But apparently one of the neighbors basically called the woman in the house and said, "There's somebody scoping out your house." So she comes out of the house and comes up to me, like, crossing the street going, "Can I help you?"
Yeah,
and
giving you the fish eye while she does it, no doubt.
And I'm like, "Oh, no. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm a writer. I'm just, there's nothing bad." I'm like, "You probably don't know, but there's a strange history of your house." And she goes, "Oh, you mean the brothel?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean the brothel." And I told her I was a writer, and this is where she goes, "Do you want to come in?" And to this day, I'm like, I'm a complete stranger who just said I was a writer. It just happened to be true, but she let me in. She showed me the entire house. I was taking pictures, and there are aspects of that book that never would have happened if not for that, because she took me into the basement, which is this creepy ass unfinished basement that I didn't know was under there. And the minute I got down there, I'm like, this is gold. This is where a lot of things are going to happen. And yeah, and the backyard I got to see, and and she would be like, this is my living room, but this is where this was the showroom where the women would wait to be called upon
Yeah.
and show their wares and all that.
The parlor. Essentially, it
The
was a
parlor,
parlor
yeah.
for that. Yes.
Yeah, it just absolutely. So yeah, I learned then, and then I've used it since then to get into fire departments and firehouses and all kinds of little places. My wife and I went to this one museum at one point, and the guy there was nobody in the museum, and there was one section that was kind of closed off, and I said, I'm a writer. I'm using this for a book. Is there any way I can? And he's like, oh yeah, come on, I'll show you. So yeah, it's a good thing for research. It's a great card to throw.
It's gold. It really is gold. Especially if you, I have found that being short and small is a plus. It's one of the few times in life where being short and small is a real plus. Is when you say, I'm a writer, you don't look threatening.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if John Hartness could pull the card the way I do. I'm sure he has plenty of ways to do it, but not in the same vein.
Oh, he plays the Falstaff card, but I mean literally, not just in his company, but he plays Falstaff. So
Right.
yeah, that's a whole different. Mine is looking harmless, which of course makes a lot of people giggle. But anyway, you're on number 16.
Yes.
How do you keep it fresh?
I write other series and other things. I'm sure. Well, I know for a fact that if I had, for the last decade or so, written nothing but Max Porter, I'd be on probably book 50. Well, definitely, because I've written over 50 books. So I'd be on book 50. I'd be making a lot more money than I make right now, but I would have been so bored and so unhappy in my life. I used to juggle about 3 different series plus short stories and things just to keep it fresh and keep myself excited about what I was writing. So I would end up writing maybe 1 Max Porter a year, sometimes 2. But by the time I got around to back to it, I'd already written a couple other books of other things. And by that point, I'm ready and excited, about coming back to those characters. So yeah, that's always been the way, and it always will be. It is a case of the book 16, which is Southern Hexes, that came out earlier this year, and I pretty much had figured I was not going to write another one this year. I might, because I got very excited about something that I want to write about it, and so that's when I usually write a second book in a year. But otherwise, I definitely do one a year.
Okay, do the Marshall Drummond books count as something different?
So yeah, they do, and they do and they don't. So the Marshall Drummond, they're not, well. One is a novella, or is a book. The rest are all novellas or short stories.
Mm-hmm.
And they started because I only put out roughly 1 Max Porter a year, and but people can read really fast, and so it really has gotten to the point where when I put out a new book in the morning, I am not surprised anymore when at night I get somebody who writes me and says, oh, I got it this morning, read it, loved it, when's the next one? And I'm like, dude, it took, I haven't even started researching that thing, and I've got other stuff to write. So I started writing these short stories of the Marshall Drummond case files, which are these short stories and novellas about Drummond back when he was alive in the 30s and 40s.
The ghost that helps Max.
Right. And this is, and he's a ghost in the Max Porter things, but this is back when he was actually alive. And I started writing them as a way to really kind of just pacify people a little bit. And I didn't expect much from them because, again, I wrote short stories for a decade. I know how little short stories actually usually make, but people started reading them and really loving them, and that has become its own thing. And they're different. I don't do research. There's no historic. It's its own thing. It's its own made up little world of things that happen there. And I do sometimes put little things in that I reference. So if you've read the short story, then you know what Drummond as the ghost is referencing but you don't need to have read them. And I find people really enjoying those a lot. So it's kind of become its own thing as well. And it's a way I can scratch that itch without having to go do a full book for everybody, including myself. Sometimes I know I'm not ready to do a full Max Porter book, so I'll just be like, okay, I'll put together a short story. I'm between novels, that kind of thing. And then just recently, a couple years ago, I wrote a Drummond story during Christmas. Um, I had not intended to; it just kind of happened, and I put it out as a Christmas gift to the fans. Um, and so then I did it again last year, and so now I don't know if you get
Now you're stuck.
well, yeah. So I have discovered, and I say this with all the love and respect for my fans and all readers, but I've discovered that readers can be very much like cats, where if you do something like 2 times for a cat, they're like, well, that's it. We're doing that forever now because I like
Yeah.
it. And we'll see what happens. I don't know if I have something for this Christmas, but I'll try to keep it going for a while at least.
Okay, we touched briefly on Nathan Kay, which is a very different series, though also has sci-fi fantasy elements. And is that all? I haven't read them, I confess. Is that also set in North Carolina, or does that do more
No,
globetrotting?
no, that goes all over the world. So Nathan Kay, I grew up reading, besides reading good stuff like Heinlein or Asimov or whatever, I also had a love for the crappy they were called men's adventure books. They were basically Harlequin romances for men, where instead of romance, they blow stuff up. So they were Mac Bolan, the Executioner, and Remo Williams, the Destroyer, and stuff like that. And but I always had a fondness for that kind of pulpy stuff, and I thought, why don't I write some of that? And but of course, magic gets involved. So Nathan Kay is about this guy who ends up having the ability to hold two souls in his body. So if he dies, the one soul leaves. It's like a spare tire. His original soul takes over. He heals up, and he's immortal. He's a regular person, and if he dies again, he's dead. But if he keeps replenishing his second soul, and when he has two souls, he doesn't age. So he's essentially immortal as long as he can hold on to two souls. And there are other people like that in the world, and they've been around forever doing this. He's new to the whole thing. And so they all have some of them work as assassins for government, some of them have their own agendas, and they're all trying to control him. And he just was like, I want nothing to do with you. I just want to walk the earth and be free. So it's all about his struggle fighting against them, trying to do good for people. And it was set up just like those other men's adventure series where, I mean, Mac Bolan is still going on. There's like 300 or 400 books in the series. They started farming them out eventually, but I had written them figuring I could go as long as people wanted it to. And it never has caught on as much as Max Porter, but I do love the series. And it's had 12 books in it. So the 13th book comes out in a few weeks, called Prime, and that book will end the current kind of story arc that started in the beginning, where Nathan will finally face off against the big bad that's been behind everything all along. And from there, I'm putting the series on hiatus till I see if there really is demand for more. Because I know that there are fans who basically, if you love the series, you love that series. The fans it has are just devoted and love it, but it hasn't quite found the level of love that like Max Porter has, or some of my other series that was more of a limited series called the Parallel Society. And I love it, but I do have to pay the bills. So 13 books is plenty, and hopefully I'll come back to it at some point. But it does need to take a break now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, 13 books is a very healthy run for any series.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, as I'm hearing about Max, I'm hearing about Nathan. I know you've got other books, the Malaysia Chronicles, your standalones, the Midnight Mysteries, the Parallel Society. You you don't necessarily think of martial arts in context with, say, straight detective work, because a lot of it is sitting in a car writing down license plates or using a telephoto lens or, something
Right.
like that. Though getting beaten up is sort of part of the game. I mean, wasn't it Philip Marlowe who knew he was getting close to something when people started beating him up seriously?
Right, right.
Um, so, there's a certain amount of physical competence is necessary, but not necessarily a black belt in any martial art. But you are, I believe, a black belt in martial arts. And how does that play into something like Nathan Kay, which is more thriller based,
Right.
or some of these other series?
So Nathan Kay is part of that's another reason I started writing the series is it's an outlet for other things. I there are actiony moments in Max Porter, but Nathan Kay is sometimes I pitch it as John Wick with immortality. So that's where I get to blow stuff up. I get to shoot all the guns. I have car chases, and yeah, I get to do martial arts and stuff as well. And uh, I've earned a second degree black belt in Taekwondo and competed in Korea and had some a lot of fun with it. I have a bad knee injury that eventually basically I had some surgery and my surgeon basically I said, well, can I go back? Can I go back? And he said, sure, but if you do, I'll see you in 5 years and you'll have your entire knee replaced. Or so I was like, that doesn't sound too fun. So I haven't done it in a long time. Um, but I still remember it all, and some of the muscle memory just does not go away. So I definitely call upon that um, in the series and use it whenever I can. But I have Max Porter taking some lessons and trying to learn some basics, but I get to have fun with it. So I remember there's a scene where he finally, he's been a white belt and a yellow belt and working his way up, and he's in a city. He's chasing down this guy. The guy punches at him, and he manages to block it. And he's so shocked that he actually succeeded. Of course, then he gets hit real hard.
Exactly.
But I have fun. I have fun with that, and having him grow from completely incompetent to somebody who's slowly building competence. He's been learning to shoot a weapon, but he's still at this point he carries a weapon, but it's not loaded. He doesn't trust himself, but he uses it as a threat sometimes and just hopes nobody calls him on it. And at some point he'll start to shoot, to have it loaded maybe. But he's also kind of like he's learning to use it just out of necessity, but he also doesn't want to ever use it. Plus, a lot of things he's up against, like ghosts, bullets really don't do much. So.
Well, won't do a darn thing unless there's, unless the creatures he's going up against have an iron allergy. You're kind of,
Right.
it's really steel jackets. Yeah, not going to help. Do you block out your fight scenes when they involve physical action? Do you do them with a friend?
So I've written enough books that I've done just about everything. You can, to kind of build a technique that works for me now. I know, like when I've done large battles, I've definitely drawn a map and kind of played it out. Um, my the reality of fighting is that real fighting is very sloppy. It's not choreographed, and therefore that was one of the first lessons I ever learned when I sparred for one of the first times. And I went to go kick the guy, and of course he went to go kick me, and we bashed shins because, of course, we were not going to. You're not waiting for the other guy. And I remember that happening, and I was certainly well into my writing career at that point. I remember thinking, oh, this is not like Jackie Chan where everything has got a rhythm and a beat to it. And so depends on the reality of the series too. Some series are far more choreographed. I've never worked it out with using another person. I don't think, I can't recall ever doing that. I know some people do. I would not subject my wife to that. That would be cruel. But there have been times where I've kind of mined it out. But I've written so many books that you just kind of, a lot of it has become writer muscle memory, and I kind of know what is going to work and not at this point, and so I don't really need to do that too much until I come up with something really strange or different. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering, which, something like the Malaysia Chronicles, where you're dealing with what is in essence a secondary world,
Right.
you get into more elaborate fighting. When somebody has a battle scene, you need more mental choreography than just
Yeah.
about anything else.
And that series, I wrote the Maya Chronicles. That was
Oh,
one
I'm
of the first series.
mispronouncing it,
That's all
please.
right. No, you wouldn't know. It's one of those things that I put some letters together and somebody's got to. I've had that happen. I hear Brandon Sanderson talking about, hitting Stormlight, and he'll be like, "Oh, and such a character." I'll be like, "That's not how I hear it in my head." So I don't know. Now I have to figure out which one is going to be correct. Usually I just go with what's in my head. But anyway, so you
You're a
call it
writer.
whatever.
It's your privilege, yes.
Yeah, but you call it whatever you want. But yeah, in that series, that was I wrote that. That was the first complete series I'd ever written. It's 6 books, and so yeah, so there, all those big battles. I drew maps out. I kind of worked it out, and I'd often base them on real battles, or I would take snippets of real battles because that I wasn't about to actually start a war with my neighbor to try and choreograph something out. So I'd look at that, or even fictitious battles that I liked, like I'd look at Helm's Deep and how that worked, and what I thought worked well in that, what didn't, and just steal from the best kind of a thing.
So obviously you're not going back to that world because it's complete. But
Right.
How about some of your other series? Are we looking at future volumes in them?
I mean, I will never say never. And like the Maya Chronicles does end, like the very last book has a definite ending. But I did introduce a character that people have asked, is there ever going to be a spinoff with that? I'm like, if there was, from a business standpoint, if there's money to be made, if Maya sells well, but not extraordinary. So if it ever suddenly people are just clamoring for it, uh, just then yeah, I could do something like that. That's why Marshall Drummond exists, because people, I didn't really have like some hot inspiration of I need to write Drummond stories.
Mhm.
It was I need a way to get my readers off my back so I can write in the next Max Porter, and I just started writing those, and because it took off, now I kind of have it in the back of my mind. Oh, this would make a good Drummond story, and so I get more focused on that.
You
Um,
you
so
said you
likewise, the
don't.
parallel. Well, I'm sorry. Yes.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was just saying the Parallel Society series, which just finished last December, the last book came out. So 7 books. It also has a definite end, but that's probably after Max Porter. That's probably my most popular series, and I'm still getting mail from people who are like they're upset that the series ended, but they're happy that they didn't want nobody wants it to become not wanted. You don't want to get I like Max Porter could just go on forever, and I tell my fans I will write them as long as you all want them written, because I figure if I ever start phoning it in, I will find out very quickly from them that it's over. But Parallel Society series had always had a finite end. It was built on a structure of a set number of books, so it ended. And now I'm getting an email all the time from people saying, "Is there ever going to be more? Is there ever going to be more?" And I mean, I can tell you right now, there won't be more of those characters. But I have been in talks with Falstaff Books and other people about possibly doing some type of thing with other authors, where the Parallel Society as a group has existed long before and long after these characters. So I could see myself teaming up with another author and writing the Parallel Society in the 1700s and something like that. If there's interest, if there's enough of the right connections to make it all work, that might happen. I'm never opposed to it if I get excited about the idea. It's got to be from an artistic standpoint, with my writer cap on. I want to be excited every day I go to write. The business side, that cap is like, go write these things, they'll make money. But the writer cap is not quite sure that the inspiration is there yet. So we'll see.
How long do you write each day? I know we all hear button share, but I have over the years interviewing people seen a wide variety of how people handle the
Right.
actual thing
So
of
I
sitting
find
down
button
at their
chairs,
keyboard.
uh, a lot of advice. Ed Schubert, who was an editor for various science fiction magazines and a writer as well, very talented guy and good friend. And he once said to me, the thing about advice, especially writing advice, is that it comes from wherever you are in your career at that moment. And you have to always remember that. So I find the whole button chair thing is great. If you are a beginner, you need to be writing every day and because you're a white belt and you have to learn how to become a black belt, which just learning basic competence of what you're doing. Once you've been doing it a long, long, long time, I don't feel it necessary. If I'm not in the middle of something, when I'm in the middle of actually writing something, I try to write every day, because momentum is a key part of getting to the end. But I don't write every day of my life. Like right now, literally right now, well, I mean, right now I'm editing things. So I'm not even working on a new book right now. And so I'm not really, I mean, I'm writing sections of things as I rewrite, but I'm not writing a new book at the moment. So there's no daily word count. It's more like I got to edit this many pages. So when I'm actually writing, I try to write 1 to 2,000 words a day, which is not much. Here's the other thing that I tell new writers. On average, from my talking to professional writers, on average, when we know what we're going to, like I plot out, so I know what I'm going to write. I'm not staring at an empty screen. We can write about 1,000 words an hour, typing. Average, some more, some less, but on average, that's where we all kind of fall in. That means that if you write just 1 professional hour a day, that's it. For a year, it's 365,000 words. That's easily 3 books. And depending on the size of your books, might be 2, might be 4, but it's a lot. And that's just writing 1 hour. So if you write 2 hours, whoa, and of course it's not that simple, but if you look at the numbers, it's not that much of a grind in terms of getting the words out. What's the grind, of course, is getting the right words out, learning how to get those words out, all of that stuff. Once you know what you're doing, some of it's just not hard. We were talking about choreographing fight scenes earlier. Another thing I often say is, you have to write a character walks into a room. Mm-hmm. And when you're a new writer, that is a difficult thing to do. You're trying to describe the room, how to balance that with the action. But I've written hundreds of short stories, over 50 novels. I have described somebody walking into some kind of room so many times that I don't even have to think about it. I could improv one right now. I'm sure you could too. It's not that hard. You've done it so many times, and it's just whatever specifics you need for that room. Therefore, and to just writing that could easily be 100 words. Take me a few minutes to do. So it's where I am in my career now. No, I don't need to button chair all the time, except when I'm trying to actually get the novel done. And then I do. And that's why the actual writing of the first draft takes me a month and a half at most to write a novel. But it might have been weeks before and weeks after that I might be working towards writing it or editing after. The full production can take several months. But
say nothing of the research and the conceptualizing.
Yeah, Max Porter always I say it always takes an additional month usually in the beginning, especially because when I sit down, I have for the next Max Porter book right now, I know there's some specific character things that I'm excited about that are definitely going to happen, but I have no idea what historical element is going to be used and how that's going to change everything. And usually there's more than one historical element. So I have to do research for, yeah, the first couple of weeks are awful. I'm just sitting there searching and reading and going, well, that's interesting, but I can't use it this time, maybe sometime in the future. And it's usually it takes about a week or two, and then something clicks. And I'm like, wait, that works. And that ties together with that thing from 3 days ago. And there we go. And then it goes.
After 50 books, do your characters still surprise you?
All the time. All the time. That's one of those things where I think you really do learn when I know when I've created a full character, when that happens. When authors often say, "Oh, my characters talk to me" and all that. And obviously, that's just our brains talking to itself. But I've had that where I remember it happening in the Malia series. The character there's a guy who's part of their group that goes along with him, this goofy guy. And in the whichever, I don't remember what book, first or second book that he gets introduced in, my intention was introduce him. He's going to be a character for this book, and he dies at the end, sacrifices himself or something like that. And it came time to write that scene, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't write the scene. Like it just kept not working. And then I remember waking up one morning and thinking about it, and basically part of my brain went, "You idiot, I don't want to die." And I was like, wait, oh yeah. And when I realized, oh, if I don't kill him, everything is great, and this all works so much better because I love this character. And so that was the first time it ever really happened. And yeah, but it still happens. And Max and his whole family, his wife, and Drummond, and all of them always, they have their routines and their pattern, but I think if they don't surprise me, that's part of when it'll get boring.
So we talked about this earlier, but who were your inspirations? Or, and are they still in the back of your head talking to you saying, this is how you do it?
Yeah, writing inspirations are wide. I encourage all writers to do this regardless of genre. I read everything. I love westerns. I love obviously science fiction and fantasy and horror and you name it. And I've been taught because at all the conventions we go to, there are a lot of paranormal romance writers. So I've been talking to them going, I want to get into romance, but I don't want to be reading the schlock. So what's the good stuff? What do I need to be reading? And so I've discovered some really good romance stuff as well, and it all influences me. But certainly growing up, I was a big Stephen King fan as a kid. I think, well, Pet Sematary was the first book of his I read on my own. But I still have a vivid memory of my stepfather reading the end of The Shining to me, my brother, and myself, and my two stepsisters. We're all kids. It was Halloween or sometime around it, and he's reading it to us. And Jack Torrance is coming up the stairs, and in the book he has a croquet mallet. He's going to bash the kid to death with. And he's coming down the hall. Well, my mom, unbeknownst to she just happened to be coming up the stairs at the time, and he's going down the hall, and she comes down the hall, and then he bashes in the door, and my mom opens the door to ask us something, and we all hit the roof, and we were scared out of our. So that was my first experience with Stephen King, and then of course, as a reader, I loved him. A little later, near my junior or senior year in high school. On my own, I discovered John Steinbeck, and that was my first introduction to, hey, literature can actually be good, and enjoyable when you're not being told you have to read it for a class. And so he got me reading good stuff, and I read just about everything he ever has written.
Including the Arthurian piece?
Oh yeah, everything.
Warren Watling, yes.
I've read his non-fiction. I've read his logs for the Log of the Sea of Cortez and all that. He's great writer. So that he was a big influence on my writing. I was a Heinlein fan as a kid. Alan Dean Foster. I mean, you name it. As I got older and really did start to broaden and read everything, because when I was a kid, it was all horror and science fiction and fantasy, because I was a kid, and comic books, of course. But as I got older, I will devour everything I can get my hands on, and it all influences me.
Yeah, it certainly does. It certainly does. If you could go back and meet yourself 20, 30 years ago, what's the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
I already answered this, but I'll tell you to say it again. I'd go back to myself a year before I started writing as an indie author and say, get in it now, because that first year, you know, Hugh Howey and I can't even think of some of the other names that came out of that time period. Part of the reason they were able to catch fire is they were writing quality work when most of what was being self-published was not quality, because all of us who were around longer than that, we thought, oh, we shouldn't do that. That's a bad thing. And I really believe if I had been in there in that beginning, it's very possible my show would be on TV right now instead of Hugh Howey's, or maybe with his, because because it could catch fire because people were so wanting to read good stuff that they were happy they spread it around. I mean, that's how Hugh Howey did it. He didn't do it. Basically, Twitter did it for him by saying, people are like, I got this new Kindle thing, and what do I put on it? And friends are like, you should read this, read Wool, read Wool, read Wool, because there's nothing else worth reading, but this is worth reading. And he's a great writer. It's great stuff. I love it. But he definitely benefited from being one of the first, and I would definitely love that.
Okay, so we're getting up to the end of the hour, so I've got two questions I always ask. First one is, what's next for you once you finish all the editing you're doing?
I have a standalone science fiction book that will probably come out later this year, then a Max Porter book, and probably no promises to fans. And I just recently I put on in my newsletter, I usually do an annual survey, and I surveyed them asking them what they wanted next, because I've closed out some of these series. I actually have gaps for the first time in years, and I was surprised at the number of people who want a science fiction series from me. So that got me excited, because I have not written a lot of science fiction. I used to write it all in short story form, but when it came to novels, that was not the demand at the time for the last bunch of years. I think people wanted to get away from reality very much, and science is still quite the real world. But it seems like they're wanting more of it now, so I might do that. We'll see.
Okay, cool. Okay, this is it. This is the big open box question. Anything you'd like to add? Soapbox is provided free of charge.
Oh, the one question I wasn't ready for. Anything I'd like to add? I'd say to all the writers out there is to read, and read widely, but also, and I don't mean this as self-serving as it sounds, but read indie authors. Especially if you were going to be an indie author, you should be reading us. There are so many good ones out there, and there are bad ones, and you should read them all just to see what good stuff you like. And I don't love reading bad stuff, but when I start reading bad stuff, I love being able to identify and think, I know why I don't like that, so I won't do that. I think it will help you a lot more than reading the trade, the traditional publisher stuff, where there's less stuff there that you're going to point to and go, and have that reaction. We're much more harsh on indie authors than on traditional published stuff. So use that to your advantage.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Stuart. This has been a lot of fun. My pleasure. And thank you out there from ConTinual.